Welcome to our June webinar on how being aware and reflective increases performance. I'm Linda Nelson, the president of ICOR, and I am serving on ISO Technical Committee 292 on Security and Resilience, helped to write the ISO 22316 standard on organizational resilience principles and attributes, and I'm currently working on 22336, which is looking at the organizational resilience policy and strategy. Our webinar series this year has been theme-based on enabling behaviors for more resilient organizations. Back in January, we took a scientific approach at looking at individual resilience. In February, we looked at how to be more agile and adaptive and flexible and what that looks like. In March, we looked at the behaviors of resourceful, creative, and innovative, and we took the perspective of inside the box, meaning you don't have to be outside the box. You just need to be doing these things within your own organization. We, in April, looked at collaboration and inclusion, and in May, we looked at how being prepared. So today's webinar, we will be focusing on being aware and reflective, and the end of July, we'll be moving on to diverse and integrated. We are going to be learning about the importance of being aware and reflective in the workplace. We're also going to help you understand how you can increase workforce, we're going to help you understand how you can increase workplace performance by allocating time for both self-awareness and reflection at work, and to consider how taking time to reflect and to learn from past experiences can inform your future decision making and also increase your ability to think beyond your current state. The recording should be available in the ICOR webinar page in about 2 days, and the link will come out with your certificate as well. If you have questions during the webinar, please go ahead and ask them. I will attempt to answer them at the end of the webinar, or we always include the questions and the answers with your certificate in your email. In order to receive a certificate, you do need to attend a minimum of 35 minutes. And to balance any of the most common question is, no, we do not share the slide deck, but yes, you can view the webinar at your convenience, both on our webinar page as well as our YouTube channel. Kind of stole this picture, but I really think that this quote by Aristotle is relevant. Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom, and this is also relevant to organizations, that organizations need to know who they are. And we're going to be seeing us reference that. You've heard me reference that before, but it sounds like kind of an duh thing, but it is really important that we do know who we are and what our purpose is. Everything that we've been doing this year has been tied to our organizational resilience capability assessment and looking at those capabilities specifically. And then secondly, we're also looking today at the strategies that are tied up with our organizational resilience model. So we're going to be looking at the particular strategies under leadership and strategy, culture and behaviors, and preparedness and managing risk. We're doing this specifically because we're trying to share with you how some of this theory, what it actually looks like in the workplace. So if we begin with leadership and strategy, one of the things, going back to the first strategy, is that we have a share, or really the capability is that you have a shared vision and unity of purpose. And what does that look like? So what we're doing here for the next few slides is taking you through these 9 strategies in our organizational resilience model, kind of giving you that platform of this is what we're talking about. And then we're going to look at the different pieces of research that are out there, papers that are out there, that also give examples of what this looks like. But we're prefacing everything or framing everything within our organizational resilience model and those strategies that are tied to that. So the first one is that your organization needs to have that shared vision and unity of purpose. And we've talked about individual purpose last year as well, and how that increases engagement. But the organization needs to reflect on, and if necessary, revise the organization's purpose, vision, and core values in response to external and internal changes. And we've certainly seen this over the past 3 years, where organizations have had to kind of change their purpose and vision and what they're doing because of all the changes that have happened with the pandemic. In addition, We need to look at how we understand and influence context. And the word context is kind of a word that's used in standards, but this really means your environment. They used to use the word environment, and I liked that word a lot better, but we're stuck with context. And so, as part of leadership and strategy, we need to have the organization itself needs to monitor and evaluate the organization's, I'll say, environment, including its interdependencies, its political and regulatory environment, its competitor activities, and all of that as part of managing change. And the organization also needs to use personality questionnaires, and we're going to talk more about that, how to get feedback and other tools that will help promote self-awareness and reflection with its people. So understanding your context also means understanding internally your people as well. When we move to looking at having effective and empowered leadership, we need to have an organization that encourages the creation and sharing of lessons learned about success and failure and promotes the adoption of better practice. And by the way, some of this is a little bit dry. So as we're going through these, maybe start thinking about, does my organization do this? And to what extent does it do this? And you could maybe put together kind of a little, tick box of what it is you think your organization, how your organization is doing for some of these things. One of the things that the organization needs to do is to seek out leaders who are self aware and reflective. And when we're talking about self awareness, a lot of times the word or the language that's used these days is emotional intelligence. And so feel free to kind of substitute the word emotional intelligence and with self aware if you'd like. And this really goes back to hiring practices again, which we'll talk about today as well. But the organization needs to also create safe places for reflection. And we're going to talk about how we need to give time for that and a place for that. It has to be intentional or it does not happen. And then, as part of all of this, we need to have leaders who encourage employees to have those open lines of communication to give and receive feedback. We can't be aware of things if we're not listening. And therefore, those leaders need to listen closely to their feedback and then do their best to implement necessary changes. Moving to culture and behaviors. One of to me, this all of these webinars, when you're looking at behaviors, are very much tied to culture. In fact, we could probably say that how the organization behaves is totally influenced by its culture. And so, looking at these behaviors are all going to be related to culture. And so, the first thing that the organization needs to do is to monitor and review its culture to see if there's, have we gone through changes that maybe we're not even aware of, incrementally, just small pieces that have made us move in one direction or the other. We need to have a culture that promotes self-awareness and reflection to help its people manage their stress. And these are just two pieces of the culture aspects, but they're all part of culture. And really how you share information and knowledge is also part of culture, because we need to have a culture where you can ask colleagues for feedback or advice, where you can observe how experienced employees are displaying their skills, where you have the opportunity to evaluate how others work, and that helps you to identify what to learn and how to learn from each other as well. And to do that, the organization needs to promote self-awareness in its people to enable them to work well on teams. And some of the things that we're going to talk today is going to be directly related. Having the self-awareness is going to help people get along better with each other as well as on their teams, and to learn and grow as well. And we also talked earlier about giving its people time for reflection, and this is also tied to sharing information and knowledge, because it's really part of addressing any sort of problem or risk you might be having, and then sharing how they did that, which is totally tied to sharing information and knowledge throughout the organization. And finally, under culture and behaviors, we need to have a culture of continual improvement that ensures that your objectives, strategies, and procedures can be kept relevant and appropriate to all the changing needs of the organization, that you implement performance monitoring and evaluation mechanisms, that you continually review the capabilities of your people and your systems to reflect all of that change, that you regularly analyze the performance of your people and making sure that reflection is included as part of that performance evaluation. And then as part of your formal, because I'm assuming that we're regularly analyzing performance, but maybe you have a formal annual planning and review process for your organization, where reflection from team members is elicited kind of from previous year to inform the next. And this is really interesting because if you allow people to reflect all through the year, and then you kind of compare where you were last year with where you are this year, you'll really see the impact of that. And if you're not measuring it, if you're not reviewing it, you know, then you're not having the opportunity to even see what the growth is. When we move to preparedness and managing risk, um, the organization needs to look at the availability of resources. And so you need to be aware of what resources are available to you, how suitable are they, and how they're allocated, and be aware of that so that you can reallocate those if you need to, because based on change. Your organization also needs to anticipate, absorb, and manage change itself. And in order to do that, you need to remain of situations that are likely to influence change. And you need to be able to analyze the cause of change resistance and really acknowledge and actively manage those causes and make that part of your change narrative. And as part of that, you need to have some common metrics across all of the ways that you manage risk for assessing the impact, because that's going to make you more aware of how those stresses are impacting all aspects of your organization. And this allows you to be more effective in your prioritizing of what you need to do and really conceptualizing what it is that's happening. So having those metrics that are common really help you with that. And you can really do this better if when you're managing risk, you've got that coordination and alignment of systems. And so having the organization regularly assess how each system contributes to the overall resilience of the organization and then address any weaknesses that you found. You can't do that unless you're aware of it. And having that coordination and alignments help increases that awareness. You also need to have some agile and adaptive and intelligent systems that are integrated to continually review and improve data and information flow so that that information can be shared and make everybody aware of what's going on so that there's a shared understanding and that information can be used to make decisions based on evidence. And of course, make sure that your data is monitored in real time. What good is data if it's old? Because you need to have that situational awareness in order to populate your models and provide feedback on those metrics. So ICOR's definition of enabling behaviors when we're talking about being aware, kind of the outcome is that the organization has a deep and comprehensive understanding of its systems and risks, which allows resources to be prioritized to provide maximum benefit. And it then allows you to apply shared knowledge and learning to innovate and improve continuously. It also helps you to your organization needs to gather information, be able to harness that real-time data and conduct horizon scanning to improve that situational awareness, help you to anticipate change or future conditions. And this all helps you to inform evidence-based decision making. And so making sure your organization assesses and builds knowledge capital and learns and continually improves for better future outcomes. I hope what you're seeing in some of these definitions is that we're really looking at strengthening an organization and not just managing risk. We're looking at managing risk as well, but it isn't just about that. It's really strengthening your business as usual capabilities as well as just getting out ahead of the game so that you're paying attention. You can't do that if you're not aware of what's happening. Self-awareness, or awareness that's defined by the Oxford English Dictionary, is that conscious knowledge of one's own character and feelings. A researcher, I liked her definition, which is the extent to which people are consciously aware of their interactions with or relationships with others and their internal states. And of course, we should reference the definition for emotional intelligence that's mostly agreed to, which is that a capacity to be aware of, control, and express one's emotions, and to handle interpersonal relationships, both judiciously and empathetically. I have to tell you that when I was first in the job market, that was never part of any hiring practice. And it was never brought up. So we have made improvements and where we're headed and where we're going, and things that have strengthened our organizations just because of time. So looking at enabling behaviors of being reflective, In this case, the organization and its people learn from past experiences and leverage this information to inform on future decision making. And this reflective nature itself, in other words, if it's part of how you operate, will increase the organization's ability to really think beyond its current activities. Again, being forward thinking as much as you can. By looking back, actually enables you to look forward, which I think is probably the biggest takeaway. If there's one thing you take away from this whole presentation, is on the reflective side, if you look back and you pay attention to what's happened, it can help you make plans for the future and help you to look forward. And whether you're, looking beyond the organization's boundary itself. And so to do that, you have to have mechanisms in place to continually evolve, and being reflective will enable that to happen. And whether that's, based on modifying kind of your current standards that you have in place or norms where you operate, or and based on some of the emerging evidence that's coming out, really, versus seeking permanent solutions based on that status quo. And if there's anything I don't think any of us wants to hear anymore, is let's just get back to the way it was. And I think we all have to recognize that there is no going back to pre-COVID. We are in a new place. We need to engage that. We need to reflect on that. And we need to look at where we should be going. And in order to do that, the organization and its people should examine and systematically learn from their past experiences. What have we gained from this experience? How can we leverage that? How can we learn from others' experiences? And how can we leverage this learning to really help us with our future decision making? So we just looked kind of like, what does an organization look like? And the next little bit, we're going to be looking at the people itself. So when we look at aware and reflective people, it really means understanding who you are, your motivations, your values, your skills, and your strengths. It's also about identifying and recognizing areas you need to develop and how you can improve. So these are just some descriptions of what an aware and reflective person might look like. You're able to critically assess your own knowledge, values, qualities, skills, and behaviors. You're able to reflect on your experiences and learn from them to inform and guide your own personal and professional development. You also clearly recognize your own strengths and weaknesses, and you're confident in articulating your skills and abilities to others. And one of the final things is you're really able to see yourself as others see you. And I don't think there's anything as disconcerting as thinking that you are a certain way and having people see you as something totally different. I think that is something that is painful. There's a lot of work that's been done to say that, having self-awareness on the individual side with your people, as well as understanding your organization. And that's why understanding your organization is the very first thing that's, listed under any management system standard, for example. You have to know who you are and what it is that you do. But it's really essential to workplace success. And we know there's been tons of research done. And one of the ones that we're going to be quoting is some of the Myers-Briggs research, is that people with a more accurate self-perception tend to perform better in the workplace. And we know that self-awareness is really crucial to success, both as an employee, as a leader, because more self-aware individuals understand others better, which enables them to lead more effectively. If you understand yourself, you can also, and I'm not saying being self-absorbed, but understanding who you are helps you to understand other people. And we know that, leaders who have a better emotional intelligence, they're then also able to better tailor their leadership style to the situation at hand, meaning they can read the room, they can understand the situation, and they can modify how they operate to make sure that it meets the needs. And they've also seen that better employee performance plus a more agile leadership style typically leads to that bottom to a better bottom line. And I'm going to have to excuse myself. I am still suffering from some allergies. So one of the things to consider is that employees with low self-awareness may be very talented, they might be highly skilled, but their inability to recognize how their attitudes and actions impact others can seriously undermine collaboration, and prevent them from developing the resilience really needed to bounce back from difficulties, because they're not having an understanding of who they are. where a person with more high self-awareness is not only likely to see how their emotions are impacting their actions and influencing others, but they're also more likely to correct those problems when they occur. And notice that this idea of self-confidence comes with that as well, because they have less interpersonal conflict, which means you have better communication and collaboration, which also improves your critical thinking. And so this idea that being of self-awareness is really, really critical. And I see it as kind of a baseline for how people get along with each other and how they collaborate. Because once you understand ourselves, we really can begin to understand how we're different to other people. And once we understand these differences, we can start to understand how we can work more effectively with others. And this is something I'm seeing as a generational thing. And I know that, you know, every generation that comes along has conflicts with its, you know, older generations. But I think this is a place that we should celebrate, that we have come to a place where our younger generations are much more accepting of people that are different than them. It's very different from, my parents' era, my grandparents' era, and my era. That I'm seeing the younger that people are, the more they're able to understand these differences. And I'm even going to go back to when I was a high school teacher. And, if you had any child with special needs, they were taken out of the regular classroom. They were, bundled together and they were separated. And so, all the other kids in the school never got to see and understand somebody who was different than them. I think the school districts themselves have made some improvements to help that, but also just kind of the change in our culture. Because when it comes to building relationships with others and responding to stressful situations, what they found is that employees with high self awareness are much more effective and adaptable. So here we're going back to, we talked about being more agile and adaptive in our February webinar. Remember, all of these behaviors really enable each other. So if you're someone who's more self aware, you have a higher level of well being, and you also have significantly higher levels of job satisfaction, and therefore you're significantly less likely to look for a new job, which in this era, really in the last few months of people totally changing jobs, we talk about employee engagement a lot and how you get people to stay with your company, because that loss of people is so difficult and so costly. We really want people to be happy with their jobs. And so if you have people who are more self-aware, they're also going to have higher levels of job satisfaction. And this really is why it's essential to that workplace success, because increased awareness leads to that, what we said, like that improvement in confidence, your improvements in decision making, how you manage people, and how you manage stress. And some of the benefits of this is you're going to have a greater understanding of your own reactions and motivations. So if you know what your triggers are, um, you can help manage some of those triggers. It helps you to manage not just yourself, but how to manage other people. It'll make you a better leader. It's also going to help you adapt your own behavior, because if you know who you are, you can then say, okay, how I normally handle this is not going to work under this situation. I'm going to need to handle it differently. If you're not aware of that, you're not going to be able to adapt your behavior, which means when you can adapt your behavior, it helps you with improved relationships as well as personal growth. And as all of us are working in teams for a big chunks of our jobs, it's really, really important that our team members are self-aware. Interestingly enough, research says that 95% of people believe they are self-aware, but if you actually go through any testing, they find out that only 10 to 15% are actually or truly self-aware, which means that there's a big gap there. And it provides us with an opportunity in management to determine where should we be focusing some of our training. And I know that, training on the soft skills is what we're really talking about here. And so this might be a gap that you could use to help inform your training as well. Some other benefits of being self-aware is that you're better able to deal with stress, and knowing your triggers helps you to respond to them more calmly. You're better able to manage your time. So one of the things I think that a lot of us have learned during the pandemic is when everything's been flipped over on its head. We had to learn how to work differently. A lot of us have, not everyone, but if you're working in an office, a lot of us have had to learn how to work differently. And so understanding, when and how you work best. Are you a morning person? Are you an evening person? When do you have your most creativity? Um, I love the summer because that's when I feel I can do some of my best writing because I'm not in, summer's kind of a slower time. And so just having an understanding of that helps you manage your time better. You also understand the impact your emotions have on others. And this is really important because self awareness doesn't just impact you, it impacts other people. So I'm sure you've all heard, oh, stay away from so and so today. He or she's really in a mood. We need to understand that just because you're in a mood doesn't mean that you have the right to put that mood on other people. And so when you are in a mood, you need to be able to figure out how to manage those negative moods and emotions so that you reduce impact on your colleagues and other people that you're working with. You should also be better able to take feedback. And this is something I think is really difficult. So I'm very passionate about organizational resilience, as you can probably imagine. And therefore, I volunteer a lot of my time on writing standards. And so most recently, like I said, I've been part of the writing team for this ISO 22336 on strategy and policy. And a hardest part of that is that other people look at what you've written and they critique it and they make changes. And it's not easy. And so this is where I've had to like really sit back and say, all right, I have to be really better at taking back feedback. If I'm going to put something out there, I have to be willing to take feedback about it and to take criticism about it. And so kind of mentally prepping myself before before meetings and trying to make sure I read comments ahead of time so that I'm not reacting in an emotional way and trying to react in a more I guess, a analytical way from the comments that are made. And doing that makes you feel more confident because I'm aware of my emotional response to criticism, and therefore I'm trying to manage that response um, in this particular situation. So there was a study done by Myers-Briggs and on people who they were asked the question is where has your own self-awareness been the most helpful? And over 56% of them said that when they're working in a team, it's really helped them to work in a team, helping them to cope with stress, helping them when they need to be acting as a coach or dealing with change, managing and leading others, dealing with clients. And ironically, receiving coaching or feedback was one of the lower ones, which I probably would have put higher up there, is just being self aware of my reaction to feedback to make sure I'm ready to be sure I'm ready for it. So there are different methods to develop self-awareness that companies can use or you can use individually as well. They range from getting feedback from peers, from completing personality questionnaires, getting feedback from your family or your managers or your clients or any wider network. You might decide you want to train to be a coach. You might go and get professional training just to learn a little bit more about how to handle this. Or we've also seen a lot of organization using 360-degree tools. But ironically, they found that these most popular methods aren't necessarily the best. The most effective is training to be a coach, but understanding that this involves many hours of learning to understand yourself before you're allowed to coach others. And it's very time consuming and very expensive. And this isn't really a very reasonable approach that most people can take. It's maybe something that you need to do outside of work. Being coached, we're all asking for mentors and coaches at work. This is something that management's doing more and more. However, there is still a significant cost and time commitment. So companies might want to look into having instead um, structured feedback from your peers. So maybe you coach certain people in management and then you enable them to implement more of that structured feedback from peers that you're doing. And of course, the easiest one to do and the one that's used the most often is completing personality assessments, and I think all of us have completed those. But one of the things, when that third one on the left, methods of developing self-awareness, one of the things it's that's been really seen as a negative is manager feedback itself. So while feedback from family managers and clients is seen as a good method, the feedback from managers is seen to be less effective. And so they're trying to hypothesize what that might be, but it could be things like, managers have particular agendas, or they're too busy, or maybe they don't really know much about what their people are doing specifically, so they can't really give good feedback. But whatever the reason, it is kind of troubling, and it is something that we need to consider, is how to train our managers to give better feedback. So there was a question that came in, is um, how to give better feedback. And so I'm asking you to be patient for a minute. And I think we're going to address that in a little bit, but that, since this isn't a webinar on how to give feedback, it's more or less on the need for the organizations to be able to um, help their people to be more self-aware. I don't think we're going to be able to get into that detail, but these guys here on the right on this picture are something that when my son was a teenager, he watched all the time, and it made me crazy. So I think it's sometimes teenage boys have a capacity to find entertainment and things that maybe their mothers wouldn't. But we all know that we work with people who are not self-aware. They're people who won't listen to or accept critical feedback. They are not able to empathize with or take their perspectives of other people. They have difficulty reading a room and tailoring their message to their audience. They also possess maybe an inflated opinion of their own contributions and performance. Um, they can be hurtful to others without realizing it. And they often take credit for successes and blame others for failures, which is really, um, you know, these are people that are not easy to work with. And so, can you make them more self-aware? These gentlemen on the right, I can't even remember their names. I should have known that. Maybe I've just like blanked it out from the painfulness of having to listen to them for so many years. But is it worthwhile to do that? So here is kind of going back to the question that was asked earlier in a little bit, is how do you work with people who are not self-aware? And I'm sure you've all seen this picture before where, somebody thinks they're a cute little kitten, and actually people are reacting to them like they're a roaring lion, because that's how they're perceived, and they don't see themselves as other people see them. And these are people who, despite past successes or solid qualifications, are, very intelligent people, sometimes display a complete lack of insight into how they're coming across. And statistically, I want you to understand that it isn't just frustrating and irritating. These people on a team can reduce the chances of a team success in half. So if you're a team of 6 and one of those people is very unaware, they can literally undermine the success of your team. And that's why, when you're talking about increasing the performance of your organization, companies really need to invest in making sure and in helping to deliberately help people to be more aware of who they are and how they impact others. When you're working, with unaware colleagues, you're going to see an increase in stress. You're going to have some decreased motivation, and you might you might leave your job just to get away from having to work with some of these people. So the company really needs to ask themselves, what can we do to minimize the damage that these people are doing on our success and happiness? Because and I want to kind of draw the attention to people who are unaware versus people that don't care. So here we've got, and I don't mean to stereotype the man and the woman who just happened to be the cartoon, but have a great weekend, and he can certainly see that she's overwhelmed with the amount of work that she has to get done. And you know he could, at the minimum, commiserate with the fact that she has work to do, or at a better side, um, be more aware of what her challenges are and help her with some of those challenges. Because the unaware generally want to be collaborative and effective, but they really don't understand how they're falling short. Versus those people that are considered office jerks, that really know where, you know, they know exactly what they're doing, and they're just not willing to change. And so at some point, companies need to also reflect, I'll use that word, and decide, what kinds of behavior will we accept and what kinds will we not? And we've talked a lot about that in some of our past webinars, even just about you can't collaborate with people who are unaware of themselves. It doesn't allow collaboration to work. So how can you help the unaware? The first question really becomes, and I think this is alluding a little bit to the question that was asked earlier, is can they be helped? And so if you've got somebody on your team who's very unaware, or maybe you're managing somebody like that, you really need to think about their intentions and whether they'd want to actually change who they are and how they react and how they interact with other people. So one of the things you can consider is, have you seen them ask for a different perspective or welcome any kind of feedback? If so, it suggests that it's possible to help them become more self-aware. But you really, one of the things that the Harvard Business Review survey found is that um, although 70% of people with unaware colleagues tried to help them improve, only about 30% were successful. Um, so here is where the colleague to colleague thing might be more difficult than if you have some kind of a formal program in place. The second question is, are you the right person? So the number one reason why people said that they didn't try to help somebody who was more unaware is because they weren't the right person. And they felt that there was someone else in the organization that would be better. And this is why it's also really helpful if you have some kind of a formalized program. You're less reliant on that person to person piece and having people ask these questions. But the first part of that is there trust between the two of you. Um, do you think they'll see your support as helpful, or are there others who might be better suited to deliver that feedback? And the third piece is really the most important. You need to be willing to accept the worst case scenario. If you try to intervene, what's the risk of actually making them angry? Could it be career limiting? Is this, you certainly want to be asking yourself that if you're trying to share this with a boss. And when you're looking at that, really what is the power differential? Because we know that unaware bosses can really have a detrimental impact on the employee's job satisfaction, I should say, their performance, as well as their well-being. And so, confronting a boss or even going around the boss can be very risky. And so you might be really stuck here to do that. And I don't know if anybody here is old enough, or if you're not from the United States, maybe you never saw the Mary Tyler Moore Show. But when I was a kid, this was one of my favorite shows. And I think one of the reasons it was one of my favorite shows is because it was a single woman, and a woman who was a professional. And were in the cases where I was watching TV as a kid, most of the women were only on there as wives or mothers, and they weren't working. And so one of the things that made this show really fun and interesting was to see how she worked with her boss, Luke Grant, who on a good day would be considered surly. On a bad day, he was downright abusive, and that wouldn't be tolerated today. Um, but one of the things that we can do when you're trying to minimize the impact of the unaware on you personally is to try to mindfully reframe their behavior. And so one of the things this person said is that he just thinks of it as the laugh track. So one of the things that made Lou Grant more endearing was the fact that after he'd do something really idiotic, and you can see how subservient she looks there with his more aggressive pose, is that he would say something that was really awful, and then there'd be a laugh track, which helped to kind of make fun of him and build her up a little bit. And so the the side of this was, how can we minimize the impact on yourself of their behavior? And so that's one strategy. The other strategy is to find their humanity. And like I was just saying, and this is where I think the younger generations have really gotten a handle on this, they're not nearly as judgmental as the older generations. And if you look at the fact that someone who's really being unaware and hurting other people is a sign that they're struggling themselves. And so I have mentioned in the past that one of my younger sisters died last year from cancer, but she'd really been struggling since her late teens, early 20s with a mental illness. And this mental illness made it very difficult for her to read the room. And I'm just saying that I'm saying that in a way that I think is really important because we could be in the same place doing the same thing with the same group of people, and she would walk away thinking that somebody had made fun of her, that they were mean to her, that something had gone against her. If she didn't get something right at work, it was because of somebody else. It was not about her. And it was her mental illness that was really causing her to be unaware of who she was. And this unawareness sabotaged her ability and her relationships with other people. And I probably lost a good 25 to 30 years of my relationship with her because instead of me seeing that she was struggling, even though I knew it was a mental illness, her behavior made it hard for her to be around, and therefore it would make me angry, which would then mean I wouldn't be around her. And so, one of the things that I've seen in younger people is their ability to be more, I don't know, maybe the word is more considerate, but less judging, I think. And so, if we can reframe their behavior in a way that says, I recognize that this is painful for you, versus taking it personally, I think is also something that can help us deal with some of the impact of the people that are unaware. And then thirdly, look at the long game. I love these keep calm and, whatever I don't know who started these things, but they're very good. Um, Understanding that just because somebody's like that now doesn't mean they can't change in the future. And so having that kind of patience where it's one step at a time, we've made a step in the positive direction. We're going to be able to continue with this, um, and we'll see where that goes. So, anyways, I thought that idea of the long game was interesting to me. So, how do we build a more self aware organization? Obviously, we have to help our people to be more self aware, but we found that as your people in your organization become more aware of their own personality preferences and have a structure in place to understand and describe them, they can start to recognize how their coworkers are similar to or different from them, and they can begin to devise strategies to work with them more effectively. And this is often done through those personality tests, and I'm sure you've all had them. One that was really the most effective to me was actually one I was on with a group of volunteers, and the volunteers were really struggling to get along. And the basic thing, I mean, it didn't take us very long. We just took a personality test, and we had kind of a moderator person, and there was four squares. We got four colors, and we could kind of see where our colors fit. And my color tended to be all in one square, which was about ideas and thoughts and feelings, where opposite of me were people who are more analytical and data driven. And surprisingly, no, I should say not surprisingly, the people who were opposite of me were the people that I was having the most trouble getting along with. And just seeing that, oh, you speak in numbers and data, and I speak in feelings and more of a theoretical thinking way. Just having that helped me to learn how to speak to those people. It was a very simple thing. It probably took 30 minutes. But the takeaway for that meant that I now worked differently. And instead of having, instead of having, expecting people to speak my language when they're communicating with me, I understood the importance of speaking their language. And if this is something I had done when I was 20, I think I would have been much more effective in collaborating and working in teams, through my younger career, rather than expecting people to work my way. And so the linking of this understanding really helps people to put these systems in place, helps people to, the company itself is, you're expecting people to work together in a certain way, and you're expecting people to account for the rights and responsibilities of those personality types. You're expecting that you're ensuring that information is communicated in a range of different ways. And you really even go as far as maybe considering personality preferences when you're doing office layouts and how people work together. So we've talked about personality questionnaires. These are the most cost effective ways. They're easy to do, and they really help people understand each other. And this means that it has a better impact on those teams, because we know that diverse teams perform better than homogeneous teams, and we know that having those team members bring different perspectives to bear on the issues to deal with is part of that. However, diverse teams mean we suffer from more conflict, often because individuals simply don't understand other people. And so helping build that self-awareness is really key to solving any issues that you're having with teams. So when we asked people, how have you developed your self-awareness? Most people said they got it from their peers, from their personality questionnaires, from their family, and then we see that um, from their manager. And so this is just some of the ways that people do that. If you want to learn a little bit more about yourself, start thinking about your own strengths and weaknesses. What do my strengths and weaknesses actually look like? So if my strength is I'm very organized, I'm conscientious, maybe you make lists, maybe you keep your desk clean, maybe you're always on time, you never miss a deadline. But it also might be that never missing a deadline could come from both being organized and just being dedicated to, the people that you're working with. And then consider, what have other people complimented me about? And so what does that suggest are some of my strengths? And then where do you need help with? Those might be considered your weaknesses, but they also might, just helping you to understand where you need to ask for help, where it is that you do that. And then looking at what kinds of things give me energy and what types of things drain my energy. So looking at that as well. So as part of that, you can identify an experience that turned out really well or went really poorly and help consider, okay, so what does this mean? And what kinds of skills and strengths have helped me be capable of succeeding in my daily life as well as in my job? And what kinds of weaknesses have contributed to having an unsuccessful experience? And I can tell you my almost all of my unsuccessful experiences have come from kind of saying things without thinking through ahead of time, being more spontaneous, which can be a positive thing, but can be a negative thing as well. And so, just considering that, I've been working my entire life on being able to take feedback better. Something I've always known. I'm working on it. Like we said, it might be playing the long game. It might take me a little bit longer to be better at that. And then, when we're looking at whatever this event is that went really well or went very poorly, else could you have done? So this is where that reflection comes in. Self-awareness and reflection are, of course, very tightly tied to each other. It's hard to be self-aware if you don't reflect. So tying this to the hiring process, we know that, hiring is often about the right skills, but we also know that hiring for soft skills is very important. So, a good hiring process should emphasize assessing the extent of a candidate's self awareness, or you might use the word emotional intelligence. So, asking things that'll help to decide, do they understand what emotions influence their decisions? Do they recognize how other team members perceive them? And do they hold themselves accountable for their actions, or do they divert blame when things don't go as planned? So, here's a couple of questions that you could ask that might help with that. Maybe use a reflective question. How have you handled obstacles in your past job? What makes you feel frustrated? And so if a candidate uses a question about dealing with failure or other challenges as an opportunity to speak poorly of a coworker or somebody who caused the problem rather than reflecting on their own possible role in the situation, it's really a good chance they're going to lack the awareness to take accountability for mistakes, and this should be a red flag for you. You should also ask about coworkers and ask some kind of the empathy questions. How do you interact with other employees, both fellow team members and leaders? What might other people say about you? And maybe give an example of how you've been misunderstood in the past. And so what you're looking for are any signs of indifference or an inability to express how others might feel about you. Um, and they might be signs of inability to really form those healthy relationships that you're going to need in a high trust environment. So we're going to kind of transition here into reflection and assessing our assumptions. The definition we're looking here is assessing our assumptions and reactions to an event, or pondering the meaning and implications of an experience, both carefully and persistently. And with reflection, we act and move forward in a more meaningful and thoughtful way. And really, it's fundamental to our growth and development itself, especially when we're developing higher mental functions such as problem solving and decision making skills. You have to have the ability to reflect on what's happened before. The challenge is, and this is funny because this is from 8 years ago, 2014, that now more than ever, we seem to be living lives where we're busy and overworked. And our research shows that if we take some time out for reflection, we might all be better off. So I don't know about you, but I was a mother of 4 children, and I had my timeout step that was more or less effective on my kids. My oldest would actually put herself on timeout, and I would say, "So, why are you sitting on the step?" And she would say, "Well, because I was thinking about what I was going to do, and I thought if I sat here, I wouldn't do it." Well, she was obviously very self-aware and reflective. And my rule would be, well, you can't get off the step till you could tell me what you did wrong and um, how you can do it better another time. And I have to tell you, one of my children, he could have sat there for days because he was not going to budge. And it was more about stubbornness and self-reflecting. But he was there because I made him sit there. But the fact is that we all need timeouts, and we need to have time to reflect on our work because it does improve our job performance. It also helps us to really understand and do something better the next time, so that we're not doing something the exact same way and having the exact same challenges. So reflection in the workplace means that we need to analyze experiences and their causes, their effects, and future implications. And if you work for a company where you've got a reflective workplace, employees are expected to think about the work they do on a daily basis. It means regularly, doesn't mean annually. And they need to consider why they're doing it and what that work means to them, their coworkers, and their customers. And they're really also tasked with how they can get more out of their work experiences and how they can become better at what they do. So the reflection is somewhat structured, meaning, okay, this just happened. This is how we've handled it. How can we do it better in the future? And this reflection is very much tied to learning. And so there's a couple of studies that were done that I think were that I chose out of a lot of them that were really easy to explain. What we're saying is learning by doing is effective, but learning by doing is more effective if you deliberately couple it with thinking. And so considering that sharing information with others is actually a very important part of learning process. And I'm sure if you remember when you were in school, the fact that you would learn something and then you'd have to write a report about it and then you'd have to share about it. And that sharing piece is the part that's often overlooked. So there was a study done where they had three groups. Of course, you have your control group, you have your reflection group, and then we had a sharing group. And what they found is that the reflection and sharing groups performed an average of 18% better than that control group. This field experiment was a little more detailed, and this was a study done in India where they were looking at actual training that they had already in place for tech support of call centers. And so what they did is they modified their training that they've got and that they've done for a particular customer service account. So they really removed a lot of the variables. And so what they did in starting in day 6, they added reflection. And so instead of just doing the training, they would take the last 15 minutes of each day writing and reflecting on what they learned that day. And these people that participated in that reflection group were almost 23% better on training, did better on their training test than the control group. Then in the sharing group, they did the same thing. They had their 15 minutes a day of writing and reflecting, but then they did an additional 5 minutes explaining their notes to a fellow trainee. So then they explained it and then they listened to the other trainee. And this actually improved their scores by another little bit over 2%. And so the control group actually worked 15 minutes longer every day because they weren't spending that time reflecting and sharing, and they still performed the lowest. And so there's a lot of studies like this that really show the power of workplace reflection and learning and how it can really improve performance for your organization. And of course, there's the quote by John Dewey that's very popular. We don't learn from only from experience. We learn from it reflecting our experience. What have we learned from this? And there's data that consistently shows that reflecting on what's been learned can increase performance by 18 to 25%. So what are some of the perspectives of reflection in the workplace? So there's really 5 perspectives that have been identified. The first one is what they call constructionist or constructivist. But some of these words are too hard to say. We're just going to say thinking about learning about the impact. And this really is a perspective or a focus for the company where they're going to emphasize growth through personal understanding, where you consider the meaning of your work, the role of that work in the world, and your individual impact on that work. The second one is more psychoanalytic, where you're looking at yourself and you're looking at self-reflection and self-exploration, where people learn that they need to experiment in their own learning to gain true knowledge. and they treat your uniqueness as an asset to your work. So these are different ways that organizations can look at reflection and hopefully use them in combination. This next one is about looking at your context or your environment, and it really emphasizes the community piece of this, which is that people are believed to learn by actively participating in that larger community at work, and they consider how they contribute to projects with their own personal strengths. The fourth one is, really challenging that status quo and emphasizes the surroundings, that everybody's a product of their environment. And so you're encouraged to challenge what you've been taught and how people can really bring that a variety of diverse perspectives to the table. And the last one is really that an activist where you're considering the whole, where it's a holistic process. People are seen as a product of multiple interactions, and they're encouraged to think about how every aspect of their lives combine to make them into the workers that they are, and how they can use those experiences to make themselves better people. So again, companies focusing on those soft skills. And we know that there's not often time. And so how can we do this? And we know that from what you've seen in the research that we've shared, that focusing only on work can actually be counterproductive. So what is it that we're actually sacrificing when we rush through assignments in order to meet quotas or goals? How much are we really learning versus losing? So the questions on the table is, what's more valuable, your experience or your reflection on that experience? And so some of these studies are a bit dated, but they're still very relevant today. And one of the things they found that is, once you've gathered a certain amount of experience, the benefit of continuing to perform those similar tasks is really inferior to pairing of that experience with efforts to analyze and reflect on it. So adding that reflection helps you to do a better job with it, not just doing it more, but actually thinking about how you're doing it and why and what's working. And so taking the time to think about the significance of the work you're doing is far more useful to you than just continuing to pound things out. And so we also know that the amount of information that people remember depreciates over time, but it also depreciates at a much higher rate if you're not practicing reflection. And so this is really one of the reasons why reflection has been promoted for many, many years, regardless of where you are in the world or what kind of work that you're doing, is because just that reflection itself helps you to do a better job at work. It also helps people to be more aware of their work as a whole, and helps them to report having an increased understanding of their tasks that they complete on a daily basis, helps them to recognize the significance of that work, which again ties to this idea of individual purpose. What is it that I'm contributing to this job, and how is it being used to make the world a better place? And so part of that means you need to recognize your mistakes, and you have to give time for that. And so we all here have seen the value of, quote, lessons learned, but a lot of times we don't do that unless it's a big thing. What we're suggesting is that we need to do this on a regular basis. And it needs to happen as soon as possible after an experience. So we need to have, even if it's after just a meeting, let's reflect on this meeting. So this is where a lot of companies are scheduling, meetings to be 45 minutes and not an hour. So you're giving that extra 15 minutes at the end of each meeting to help people transition to their next activity or their next meeting, but also to consider that time, what they've learned from that meeting, how can they implement that new knowledge and what it means to them. But we also need to give them some uninterrupted time. So in our innovation webinar, we really talked about you can't be innovative and resourceful if you don't give people scheduled time to reflect and to think, and just to put aside those work activities for a period of time. So whatever that period of time is, your organization really needs to schedule this. And if you're in any sort of management, you need to think about what that looks like for your part of the team. And of course, people need to be seen as individuals with their own opinions and thoughts. I am going to skip this. This is a Forbes article, and like we always do, we'll give you the reference to this. It's quite long, but these are some different ways that you can actually implement that. It's just, this would probably take another 20 minutes, so I just have it in here. So just to remind myself to tell you about it. And so when we look at both self-awareness and reflection, we need to think about them as tools. And so how can we, get better at doing these things? And so What I really have a challenge for you is to look at how can you use self-awareness and reflection to help us better understand how your organization as well as yourself have been impacted by this pandemic. So just to close, one strategy to build a more resilient organization is to hire and train people to be more self-aware. We need to provide regular time for reflection to improve workplace performance. And we need to purposely schedule time for group reflection after an event that impacts the organization as well. We have some really good references here today. Again, we'll share those with you so that you have them. We invite you to attend our July 27th webinar where we're going to talk about diversity and integration. And again, please share your ideas for our webinars for August through December. Of course, we have our professional education on what leaders of the organizational resilience strategy need to know, and helping you to become certified as a leader in organizational resilience. We offer those live online as well as independent e-learning. And finally, we also have our capability assessment where you can measure your organization's resilience. And please follow us. Check out our YouTube, check out our blog, and follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook. Thank you very much for your time today, and looking forward to seeing you again.